True, but who's going to stand here and say that? It was stated that only 5 times we have declared war in our history. True, but who's going to stand here and say that men that died in Vietnam and in Korea weren't in a war?
Defend the Guard is one of the most important and exciting things happening in American politics today. Simply put, Defend the Guard legislation says that the states will refuse to allow the president to nationalize their Guard troops for overseas combat without an official declaration of war by the U.S. Congress.
It's not like hippies who are against the war. It's badass combat vets who are telling you exactly why, short of a congressional declaration of war, you do not have the right to use the National Reserve. So you know what I mean, for
In other words, never again. Since Congress, of course, will always refuse to take responsibility for the wars they finance.
You tell that widow, or you tell that orphan, I'm sorry, son, but your father had to die because we didn't want to lose federal subsidies.
The PBS NewsHour came out and did a 15-minute segment on Defend the Guard last year. Everywhere they testified before state legislatures, the Pentagon races to send a 2-star general to try to intimidate the states into sticking with the status quo. You know what that means. It means that the Defend the Guard movement is hitting the war party right where it hurts.
It puts the brakes on till we rush headlong into some unnecessary war again.
Great nations do not fight endless wars.
It's just true. And now the majority view. These wars do not serve the national interest, only narrow special interests. And while the government can safely disregard public opinion on almost every issue, without the mass support of the right, they just can't do it.
If you really want to honor veterans, quit making them.
To save America, we've got to abandon the empire.
This is a very sound effort to bring back, once again, the constitutional responsibility of all of us.
The spell has been broken. Americans can be tough, but smart. Learn more at bringourtroopshome.us and defendtheguard.us.
Because I'm so glad to be here. My name is Dan Mcknight. I'm the chairman and founder of an organization called Bring Our Troops Home, and we are the national sponsors of the Defend the Guard movement. And I'm amongst my people, right? When I'm with the Libertarian Party, I get to be myself. We get to tell off-color jokes. We get to talk about toxic masculinity and expressing our own emotions and telling the government to get the hell out of our lives. I'm amongst my people, so thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so proud to be here. I'm a 13-year veteran of the military. I'm a strange creature. I served in the Marine Corps, and then I transferred to the Army, and then I joined the Idaho Army National Guard after I was done with both. And in 2005, after 2001, I actually re-enlisted back into the Guard, because I was going to go avenge America. I wanted to take the head off of the snake. I wanted to do all the things that we thought we were doing when we first joined, and I wanted to defend America and spread democracy and all those apple pie things that we talk about. And so in 2005, I was part of an Apache attack helicopter unit. We were shipped to Afghanistan. And we were attached to 82nd Airborne and 10th Mountain Division as National Guardsmen, which was a novelty. The National Guard hadn't really been used in war as much as they are now. Now it's commonplace. Nobody wanted us there. 82nd didn't want us because we were weekend warriors. 10th Mountain didn't want us because we were part-time soldiers. And so nobody really helped us, even though we were the ones that were laying down all the air support for them. And so I had 12 men that worked for me that were from the Wisconsin National Guard, and their boots were wearing out, their body armor was failing, their uniforms were torn, and we couldn't get any support from the chain of command from 10th Mountain or 82nd Airborne to get new supplies. And so out of frustration, one day I grabbed a satellite phone, and I'm deep in northeastern Afghanistan, the Pesh River Valley. That's the part that's right up by Pakistan, where the Korangal Valley was at. And I climbed to the top of the mountain and got a real clear signal on that satellite phone, and I called a number that my friend had given me. And the governor of Idaho answered the phone. I got his personal cell phone number. And I said, Governor Risch, my name is Dan Mcknight. I'm a sergeant in the Idaho Army National Guard. I'm in Afghanistan. I hope I have your attention. Dan, you've got my attention. And I told him what was going on. I said, you're the commander-in-chief of the National Guard. You've got Idaho citizen soldiers that are failing in war right now because we don't have boots. I need your help. And he goes, Dan, I've been the governor for a minute. I was just appointed governor. I was lieutenant governor last week. our governor went to Idaho to go work for the Bush, or went to DC to work for the Bush administration. He goes, but I do understand the Constitution. I understand I'm the commander-in-chief of the National Guard. I don't know what to do, but I'll do something. Satisfied, I hung up the phone, I walked back down and went back to work. And 2 days later, my battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Collier Lipple, a man who I have no love lost for, called me and said, I don't know what you did, Sergeant McKnight. I don't know who you called, but there's a shipping container on its way from Idaho right now with all the supplies we need. Now give me your goddamn satellite phone. And anybody that's a veteran understands that's the military in a nutshell, right? You don't show up the brass, no matter how incompetent they are. And so I always held Jim Risch up on this pedestal. This governor, this short man, he's about this tall. He was a hero to me, right? We reached out for help, and he understood his role as the commander-in-chief, he understood the Constitution, and he went to work for us. I got hurt in Afghanistan, I came home, and after 13 years, the military didn't want me anymore, which is fine, I didn't want to be there anymore. I was angry, I went underground. I lost my business while I was deployed. I came home, broken, divorced, foreclosure on my house, business gone, cabin, motorcycles, all of it gone. I was angry. But in true Marine Corps spirit, I'm too dumb to remember what happened yesterday. And so I eventually pulled myself up by the bootstraps, started a new business, got a new job, met my new wife, went to the Dominican Republic on our honeymoon, and somebody on the way out the door said, hey, read this while you're there. And I put it in my bag, and I was laying on the beach, bored out of my mind, restless, and I pulled that book out, and it was called Fool's Errand. Has anybody read Fool's Errand? The great Scott Horton wrote it, and I started reading the book, and my beautiful wife is asleep on a beach chair next to me, and I'm yelling at the book. Yelling. Because finally someone had put in words, in print, what was going on in my head. I got angry, I got real mad, and I got home, I read that book in about a day and a half. And I looked up this crazy Scott Horton character. I didn't know who he was, never even heard of him. And found his phone number, because that's what I do. I like to pry into people's business. And I called him. And I said, you ruined my honeymoon. And I explained to him why, and he got a good chuckle out of it, and we become friends. And he encouraged me to use my status that only veterans have. To use it to do something to further the cause for peace in America and a proper foreign policy. And so I did. I started an organization called Bring Our Troops Home. And this was in 2019.
Amen.
And I started it because I got pissed off that one of my best friends from the National Guard was going back on his 5th combat tour. 5th. And every time he came back, I didn't recognize him. He became more and more different from the man that I knew and loved. And I got angry. And so I said, I'm going to reach out to Jim Risch again. He's no longer our governor, but I've been watching his career silently. And he's now the chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, the 2nd or 3rd most powerful man in foreign policy in America. And I said, I'm going to reach out to Jim Risch again and see if he'll just advocate for peace, just a little bit, try and end the wars that have been going on for 20 years, just do something. But I didn't know how to reach Jim Risch, so I wrote an op-ed. And I got out my box of crayons, and I wrote it as best I could, using my best penmanship.
And the meals.
What's that?
And the meal.
That's right. And so I sent it to all the newspapers in Idaho, and I don't know what the hell happened, but 8 of them picked it up and published it. And then Jim Risch came to town a week later, and I went to an event. I called a buddy of mine, not a Marine. He had a camera. If it was a Marine, it would have been a camera. Yeah. And we went, and I waited patiently for Jim Risch to deliver his speech. And at the end, when they opened it up for questions, I stood right up, and my friends started filming me. And I said, Senator Risch, my name is Dan Mcknight. We had a brief interaction about 15 years ago, and he stopped me right there in front of this room of 1,000 people, and he goes, I remember you, Sergeant Mcknight. I remember the situation. I read your op-ed last week. I agree. We're done nation building. We're done sending American tax dollars to a country that does not want us there, does not respect it. We will not be the world's policeman. I thought, holy shit, this is easy. Activism is easy. We should try this more often. Jim Risch got on an airplane, went back to Washington, D.C., and if anybody knows anything at all about Jim Risch, he voted 3 times over the next 90 days to extend the wars indefinitely in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen. In my head, earmuffs to the kids, fuck this guy. I got pissed. And so I started this organization. I said, I'm going to take 100 of my friends who are veterans and any state lawmaker I can find, and we're going to go to Washington, D.C. We're going to storm the Capitol. And for the NSA, That's figuratively.
In Minecraft.
In Minecraft. And so we did it. We took 100 veterans from around the country and about a dozen or so lawmakers that we found that were sympathetic to the cause from all different states. And we raised some money. We all went back there and held a 3-day event where we had speakers and we had veterans getting up and talking about the issues. And then we arranged for every single person in attendance, lawmaker and veteran, to go visit with their senator and their congressman and just plead, hey, do something to try for peace. Something. I don't care what it is. And they all want to take a picture with the veterans so they can send it home to their constituents and say, we support the veterans and all the other bullcrap that they say. And then they all dismissed us without promising to do anything. So we left. We went home pissed, angry. Washington, D.C., it's lost. We can't fight there. We decided we're going to go back to the states and we're going to fight in the states. We're going to use the power of the 10th Amendment to do it. And once again, we opened up the Constitution and read and tried to figure out how we could do it. And in this process, we met Pat McGeehan, who we saw in the video talking about federal subsidies. We met him and learned of this bill that he had been sponsoring for almost a decade and had never even gotten a vote in a committee or anywhere else. And we said, we're going to adopt it. And so, my home state, I'll talk about Idaho quite a bit, because I'm proud of Idaho. I love it. I love everything about it. I love how not Republican we are, even though we're the most Republican state in the country. We're governed by frauds. But we have this rich history of being on the correct side of war issues. Even though in recent decades, the Idaho Uniparty, the neo-lib, the neocons, the Republicrats, the Democrats, and whatever you want to call them, they find themselves on the same side of the war issue. And the further along we get in time, the closer they get to being aligned. They are truly the uniparty. I would accept if our politicians were just agnostic on war. They don't have an opinion one way or the other. I'd accept that. But there's no way for us to even claw back to that position. So we can't accept neutral as an option. But in Idaho, and I'm sure Minnesota's the same way, we're no longer this agricultural dirt farmers trying to scratch out a living from the earth and feed our families and live a humble existence. That doesn't exist anymore. But what we have in ruby red Republican Idaho would actually probably shock you. Most of the federal prognosticators, the people that predict elections, think that the Elephant Party is going to regain majority control of the Senate again this year. Now we can argue if that's going to happen or if the Grand Old Party is going to squander it away like they always do. But we'll talk about whether that's going to happen or not later. I want to talk about Idaho tomorrow and Idaho from yesteryear. And you know that if Idaho had its own Mount Rushmore like your neighbors to the west do, and only elected politicians could be on that mountain and have their faces carved into the granite, we have two faces, that's it. One of them was from the World War I era, one from Vietnam. One's a Republican, one was a Democrat. Senator William Borah from World War I, he opposed the Treaty of Versailles in the League of Nations, rightfully. And he led a group of people called the Irreconcilables, a group of senators that everybody hated. I call that today just the Senate, right? But back then, there were 11, 12 that were considered just horrible for the United States Senate, and they fought against the Treaty of Versailles and actually won. They actually won, keeping us out of the League of Nations. So Senator Borah is a hero of mine. And the other face that we would put on there is Senator Frank Church, a Democrat, a very liberal Democrat, who came from Idaho. And anybody know the name Frank Church? Church Commissions, right? He's the one that basically exposed us to the CIA monitoring and spying on us. He also became both William Borah and Frank Church became the chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. We were punching way above our weight class in Idaho. Very small state with two very powerful senators. And Frank Church used his position as that chairman to end the war in Vietnam and force America out of that war. So we have two faces, that's right. We have two faces on our Mount Rushmore. We could have had a third with Jim Risch. That bastard's opposed to granite faces, I guess. I don't know what his problem is. So our Mount Rushmore, it has some real bona fides. Let's talk about what we have today. Our Senator, Mike Crapo, been there for 100 years. In November, he'll become the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. He loves digital currency, federal digital currency. He voted against the AUMF repeal, the one from 1991 that put us in the Desert Storm. Jim Risch is there. We obviously know he loves war, loves everything about it. We have two congressmen. Mike Simpson was a co-sponsor of an amendment to the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act. The amendment was called the Crow-Cheney Amendment. Does anybody know what that is? No? It was an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that forbids the use of one dime of American taxpayer dollars to redeploy troops home from Afghanistan. My congressman, Ruby Red, Idaho, voted for that. Co-sponsored it. Our other one, our Liberty champion, Russ Fulcher, he recently voted against the 1991 repeal of the authorization of use of military force that put us in Desert Storm. We still have that on the books, Desert Storm's authorization. And so, Idaho, with this ruby red place, is not really what everybody thinks it is. My notes have just disappeared. There we go. Fast forward. Let's talk about some other states. Let's talk about Minnesota for a second. Let me get down here. You guys have a rich history of being on the right side of U.S. foreign policy too. Good or bad on everything else he did, Rudy Perpich was your governor, right? When Ronald Reagan wanted to send the National Guard to Central America to build airfields and landing strips, Perpich said, hell no. Not if you're going to use those airfields to invade Central America, which may or may not have been happening, we don't know. But he stood up and said, no, I'm the commander-in-chief of the National Guard. You can't have our troops. And it required Congressman Montgomery, you know, the Montgomery GI Bill, that guy, to pass an amendment saying that the governors could not object to the deployment of the National Guard. Perpich forced that. And it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually ultimately sided with the Department of Defense, but it opened the door for our bill. So that was a couple decades ago, and it's paying fruits today. Your former governor, Jesse Ventura, he's the first former governor to endorse Defend the Guard, right? He's still right on this, and he's got skin in the game, right? Navy SEAL. You know, he served for, I don't know how many, what did he serve, 15 years as a SEAL?
He was a frogman, not
a frog, excuse me, you are correct. And so, you know, we've got some history there. Let's go way back in time. Charles August Lindbergh, Minnesota man. Everybody knows him, right? The father of the famous aviator. He said this: there are interests in America who would rather lose American lives than their own dollars. That's a pretty powerful statement. Another fun, important fact about Lindbergh: he opposed the Federal Reserve. Come on now, let's go Minnesota. Ernest Lundeen, congressman from Minnesota and a future senator from the Farmer Labor Party. He was a Spanish-American war veteran. We're going back a minute now. But his campaign slogan, America First. Sound familiar? Right? He said, I volunteer here, right now in Washington, D.C., to lead an untrained but warlike war-voting company of volunteer congressmen into the trenches of Europe. Let 100 members enlist in some regiment for war. When you vote for war, send your name to Uncle Sam as a volunteer. Let us not send our boys into foreign wars unless we are willing to go with them. Holy crap. Where's this guy at? Minnesota Senator Eugene McCarthy was the only Democrat brave enough to primary Lyndon Johnson in 1968 in opposition to the Vietnam War. So Minnesota has a rich history, right? We're walking on pretty hollow ground right now. Another true statesman, this time from California, his name is Hiram Johnson. He said this: there are remarkable and singular apathy of our people as apparently we are about to enter a world cataclysm. Our foreign policy, or rather lack of it, has destroyed our national fiber. Back in the consciousness of our people, even now, when we are right up against world war, is the belief that it's all some bunco game after all, and that we are simply in another one of the crises with which we have become familiar. Boy, isn't that the perfect description of how we talk about the Ukraine war right now? It's just another crisis. It's not war. It doesn't matter that we're killing a generation of young men, that they're conscripting 13 and 14-year-old men to fight wars that we're funding. It's just another crisis to us. I don't know if anybody saw what happened on the floor of the House today when they passed the Ukraine funding bill. The entire chamber broke out waving Ukrainian flags, clapping and cheering. It's the most disgusting display of anti-American sentiment that I've ever seen in my life.
Treason.
It is treason. Our government spent more than $170 billion and shipped some of the most destructive and forbidden weapons of war to Ukraine. And nothing we send them will result in Ukraine winning that war. There's nothing. All it's doing is extending the war and killing more people. We are at war now, literally, with a nation that has the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the entire world. And the response from most Americans is, it's the worst worst that could happen. We've become so used to crisis. We've become too used to the news of war while insulating ourselves from the worst consequences of it. So when we're presented with the real risk, a potential global cataclysm, we just simply shrug our shoulders. Sorry, I don't know what it is. It's dry air here in Minnesota.
Ironically.
We dismiss the risk of nuclear war because we refuse to believe it's even possible. But I promise, the day that Joe Biden committed us to that war, nuclear war did become possible again. Why are we so apathetic as a population? To answer this question, we kind of got to leave the topic that we're here talking about today. Why are we so apathetic? Let's go back to, let's see, Hiram Johnson again. When he voted and debated against the Espionage Act of 1917. We can all agree that was probably a good position to take, right? What happened recently in the last 2 weeks with the Espionage Act of 1917? I expect someone in the libertarian room to know this. They expanded. That's FISA, so that was the beginning of it. But 3 weeks ago in Great Britain, Julian Assange, he had the last chance to fight against his extradition to the United States of America. What was he arrested on? Espionage Act of 1917. What was his crime? Journalism. Journalism. So why are we so apathetic? Let's just think about this for a minute. Johnson said this. He said, in our tenderness for democracy abroad, we might forget democracy at home. Think about that for a second. He also said later on, they have been picking our pockets to poison our minds, when he's talking about the press. So at Assange hearing, back up. So for 5 years, Assange has been jailed at Belmarsh, which is one of the United Kingdom's most harsh prisons. Before that, 7 years, he was locked in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. He's been persecuted under the Espionage Act of 1917, the very same law that Hiram Johnson fought so strongly against. He exposed the lies about governments that they were telling about war and murders being done and executed by the government. Why are we apathetic about war? Because we can't even tell the truth about it. Compare his courage to the stenographers and the professional liars in the corporate press today. One of them receives accolades and prestige, and the other one receives a death sentence. When you're not dangerous enough to be killed, but you are loud enough to be troublesome, the war party will work to tarnish you and tear you down and malign you and ostracize you from the public square and even from your own social circles. That's always been their modus operandi, always. And it's rare indeed that anything, any speech today, ever from any politician, any pundit, any talking head, that doesn't condemn Americans like you and me who would say, let's take care of our own first. They call us selfish and provincial. They call us tiny, small-minded, isolationists. I'll wear those name tags. I'll wear them. If it means that the United States war machine is not involved in wars in 117 different countries in the last 2 decades, I'll take it. Restrained foreign policy and the jealous guarding of our own, the love of our traditions and our institutions, the passion for our land and our liberty, these have all become grievous sins. We're told that our past affords no precedents, that our history contains no lessons, and that all of those who have passed before us, whose names that we revere, spoke nothing but empty words, and that their counsels give no guide to us today. So we've been living with this perpetual and continuous warfare for over 2 decades now. Raise your hand here if you've been called a traitor for upholding the Constitution and insisting on the same from the ruling class. Veterans in the room, raise your hands. How many of you were, if you were to speak up against the global war on terror or Vietnam, would be considered heretics in your military circles, right? I know that I have, and it's because I listen to the guiding counsels of those who have passed, like Ernest Lundeen and Charles Lindbergh and William Borah and George Washington and James Madison and living legends like Ron Paul, or even closer to your home like your former governor Jesse Ventura. I listen to their words, I listen to their counsel, I listen to their experience, and then I apply it to today. When our enemies attack us, it's because we're right. It's not because we're crazy. If we were crazy, they would ignore us. They attack us because we're right. They attack us because we're Americans. They attack us because we're not shy about it. Right? We believe in this thing. Right? What did Joe Biden call it? You know, the thing. The Constitution. We believe in that. Right? It means something. We fight over process and procedure over whether or not to endorse a concept or philosophy or where to put a comma in a sentence. We believe in the process. We believe in our founding documents. Ask any American mother in Kansas or Illinois or California or Minnesota if she's for peace, and she will say yes with all of her heart.
Yes.
Ask her if she's willing to send her son and her grandsons
Fuck no. Yeah.
to go fight in the Balkans, to China, to Korea, to Siberia, to Arabia, to the Dalmatian coast, to Poland, to compel peace somewhere else. I promise you, she'll answer no just as promptly.
Fuck no.
Even that. It's antithetical to the American spirit to police the world. I truly, in my core, believe that. We are a great nation, but great nations, that we expand our influence not by force, but by example. Today, American soldiers are deployed to all of those places I just listed. All of them. Anybody ever heard of the Dalmatian coast?
Yeah.
Yeah, where is it?
I don't know, they.
The Balkans, right?
They breed Dalmatians there.
I don't know if that's true. They might. I don't know.
Isn't that like the one war that Bill Kristol could justify?
It's the
as
one
a
war that
success?
Bill Kristol said was a success. That is correct. Boy, I can't believe we said Bill Kristol on the Libertarian Party convention.
Normally there's
Let's see.
cursing
Americans
around.
want sovereign control over our own country, over our own borders. We want to put food on our table. We want to work honest jobs, and we want to do it without the government putting weight on our backs. We want to raise our families. We want to live in the lifestyle that we're accustomed to, and we want to do it without state-sponsored social engineering. We want to keep our money. We want to keep our property, and we want to keep our own pursuit thereof. We want this for ourselves, and we give well wishes to the rest of the world as they figure out their own path. But as people, we will not wittingly sacrifice our children and their future and their prosperity to dictate how other countries govern themselves, whether or not liberty grows in other climates, or to remake the world in our own image by transplanting our own, particularly American system. That is the point of this effort. That is the point of the Libertarian Party. That's the point of Defend the Guard. And there's a lot of wisdom that I've just spit out. I know it sounds like a lot of work sometimes, but each person in this convention should feel proud. You should feel connected to the history of the Minnesota people that have been anti-war, that have been pro-America First. And I know America First has been turned into a tagline of Orange Man, I get it. But there were some great Americans that lived out by the America First mentality before my friend Donald Trump in the back corner. That's what we've been doing for 5 years now. We've been putting principle into action. And here's where the rubber meets the road. And as much as I love the Libertarian Party, I'm going to ask you all to listen real carefully. Putting principle into action. We are not, my organization, we're not a literary club, we're not a debating society. We're veterans who are tired of seeing our friends maimed and killed and destroyed in wars that our country shouldn't even be fighting. And that's why Bring Our Troops Home has adopted the Defend the Guard Act as our cornerstone project. Now remember, a few minutes ago I talked about that trip we went to DC, and we all sat down. A dear friend of mine who was, he was a representative in Wyoming, his name is Tyler Lindholm. I don't know if anybody knows the 6'9" Wyoming cowboy. He's a crypto cowboy of Wyoming. Anyway, he went to go see his congresswoman when we were in DC. And who knows who the congresswoman from Wyoming was? Liz Cheney, right? Tyler sat across with Liz Cheney and pled his case, very respectfully. Asked her what situation would she support America coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq. And she looked him dead in the eye, didn't blink, didn't flinch. And she says, Tyler, as long as I'm in Washington, D.C., we will never come home from those places. Never.
Thank God she's gone.
Thank God she's gone. Let me tell you a little bit about that. You're going to love this. We knew in that moment that we couldn't fight in D.C., right? We left, we licked our wounds. And then we did the same thing that I teach in our political leadership class. We manned up and we doubled down. We went to war. Knowing that DC wasn't the battlefield that we were equipped for, we decided to go to the States. We didn't really know what we were going to do, but we knew that Cheyenne, Wyoming was a better place to fight than Washington, D.C. We recognized that Phoenix, Arizona was more hospitable than the D.C. swamp. The blackened patina copper dome of the South Dakota Capitol building in Pierre was high ground compared to the steel and glass buildings surrounding the Capitol Mall that house all of the defense contractors. And we knew that St. Paul, Minnesota provided a strategic advantage for a small organization like ourselves, better than slogging through the swamps of North Virginia. But first we had a fight to finish. See, I grew up the son of an electrical union worker. My dad was the foreman of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And during the summer, we'd go to my grandpa's dairy farm, and so I was a blue collar as they come. And I was taught to say, yes, ma'am, please, thank you. And probably the thing that I remember most of my childhood is being taught that you finish every goddamn fight. You don't start them, you finish them. And if you're not going to win the fight, the bastard better know he was in one. Right? So we packed up and we went to Wyoming. I didn't know how to fight in Wyoming. I didn't know what to do. But we organized veterans and Wyoming patriots in every single county in Wyoming. And we got the Republican Party to censure Liz Cheney in every single. Then we found a couple brave ones to go to the state convention and take those resolutions of censure to the state and strip Liz Cheney of every penny and institutional support from the Republican Party in her next election.
Yeah.
Were we effective?
Yeah.
Hell yeah, we were effective. Woo! This is the best part. 3 of us. 3. And none of us had our feet on the ground. I was in Idaho, my director of field operations was in Texas, and my communications director was in Florida. Action. Principle into action. That is the key to changing anything. Anything. If I teach you something here today, and you use it for something not liberty-based, I'm going to hunt you down.
I promise.
I promise.
Minecraft. It's got a
Minecraft.
It's got a particular set of skills.
So along the way, though, like I said, I discovered this living passion for Defend the Guard. And so after we got done taking the head off of Dick Cheney's wonder child, the butcher of Bethesda, right?
Liz McCain.
Liz McCain. We decided to go to work with the 10th Amendment Center. If you guys know that, don't know them, you need to.
That's right.
And Pat McGeehan in West Virginia. And we came up with a bill to defend the guard. We actually modified it a little bit. Pat's original bill was only 51 words. Awesome, right? Here, I'm going to read the whole thing, the whole bill. The West Virginia National Guard and any member thereof shall not be released from the state into active duty combat unless the United States Congress has passed an official declaration of war or has taken official action pursuant to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the United States Constitution, period, end of bill. Woo! Resolved, right? 51 words, so clearly written. But as a Marine, I can make it even easier. The National Guard will not put the boots on the ground until Congress puts their name on the line. 19 words. I like my version better. You see, the National Guard now, as of 1903, this is where it gets crazy. I'm not going to get into the weeds, but the purposes of the National Guard are to serve now, or they're being used synonymously as the active militia of the state. I don't like that definition, but that's the world we live in, so we get to play with that a little bit. And the militia clause of the Constitution gives the federal government the clear authority to call the militia forward for 3 purposes. What are they? Does anybody know? To repel an invasion, to put down an insurrection, and to enforce the laws of the Union. That's it. That's the only thing the federal government can call the National Guard into active service to do. Where is war that has not been declared fall into that trifecta? Nowhere. Right? But a proper declaration of war by Congress, signed by the president, becomes the law of the Union. So if America must go to war, and our representatives with our authority have voted on it, then the National Guard should be the fighting force of America. They should defend America. But not until my representative puts his name on the line first, because if it goes bad, I need somebody to hold accountable. And the president's never going to be held accountable. So that's the core of the Defend the Guard. And I don't want to get into the weeds with Title 10 or Title 32 or the Supreme Court decisions that are affecting it, but know this. We get passed in one state. We're going to the Supreme Court. It's going because that's where it has to be settled. And we want that fight. We want the clarity. Right? We don't always need someone to agree with us, but we do need clarity so we know who the enemies are.
Amen.
When was the last time Congress declared war? Let's talk about that for a half a second.
World War II.
World War II.
Who was the enemy?
It was the Czechoslovakia.
You're close, closest. It was 1942, Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria. That was last time. It was World War II. But 83 years ago, how many times have we fought in war since then?
10,000.
I don't have my fingers and toes, and again, former Marine, so I can only go so high. But I'm going to go up with a little list that I just made before I came downstairs today. Here we go. Korean War, Lebanon crisis, Vietnam, Bay of Pigs, Cuba, the Dominican Civil War, the Korean DMZ, Lebanon again, Grenada, Libya, Persian Gulf tanker wars, Panama, Gulf War, Iraq no-fly zone enforcement, Somalia, Bosnia, Croatia, Herzegovina, Haiti, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Yemen, Iraq again, Northwest Pakistan, the Somali Civil War again, Operation Ocean Shield, Libya again, Uganda, Iraq 3, Syria, Libya again, Djibouti, Africa, Kenya. There's 33 that I just came up just with pen and paper, crayon and paper. The National Guard makes up over 50% of the total force protection plan of the United States. Removing that piece from the battlefield by forcing Congress to do their job has attracted some very interesting opposition. So every time we go to a state house, we get the bill introduced with a champion. We go to a committee hearing. That's the first process of a bill becoming a law. And we show up with veterans from the Global War on Terror, Vietnam, the American Legion, VFW, activists, constitutional experts, family members of veterans who have lost their lives in war from the after effects of war. And they're to testify against us almost exclusively, almost every single time, is a single person. A 2- or 3-star general in his dress uniform or her dress uniform with a chest full of medals and ribbons. And they say things like this: if this bill passes, they'll defund your National Guard. You're going to lose jobs in your state if you pass this bill. They say things like, sure, the Constitution says that Congress has the authority to declare war, but we just don't do that anymore. I'm sorry, we have a process for that. It's called amendment. Woo! They say things like this: when people enlist in the National Guard, they know what they're getting into. They want to fight for their country. That's the most callous thing I've ever heard in my life. What they don't say is that the people that are there to testify against us, the 2- and 3-star generals, the adjutant generals of the State National Guard, they wear 2 hats. The hat that they wear most of the time is a professional paid lobbyist for the National Guard Bureau in Washington, D.C. And their job is to advocate for more and more and more and more federal dollars for the National Guard in each state. So when will we tell the federal government, you can't bribe me with my own money anymore on this issue, on any issue? They hold the dollars in front of us that they took from us. It's disgusting, and we've got to put a stop to it. The National Guard Bureau has threatened the Speaker of the House in one of the states we're working in that if he even assigned the bill to a committee before the sun comes up the next day, they would close a training base in his district and 600 people would lose their jobs. They're serious. They're here to play ball. But we have some friends in Washington, D.C. who sit on the Weaponization of Government Committee, and they're waiting for one of those people to put that threat in writing. And then they're going to pull their ass right before that committee and they're going to embarrass them. They're going to question them on what authority they have to do those type of threats. So we're looking for one champion to stand up and force that issue. Force them to take dollars from us. Liz Cheney herself said that she would see to it that Wyoming lost 2 C-130 aircraft if they even heard the bill. I don't know if she has that authority anymore. To date, we've taken Defend the Guard from 1 state, West Virginia, to over 30 states with active bills. It's been 5 years. Took a few years to gain traction, like all good legislation does. Constitutional carry took 7 years before the first state would even hear the bill. Now it's in 28 states, I think. It takes time, 29. But last year, for the first time, we passed the bill out of a committee for the first time in Montana. 2 weeks later, it passed the Arizona Senate, which it passed again this year in the Senate, 2 years in a row, before it was killed in the House through some really dirty politics, and I'll tell you about that if you ever have time. We've passed, while it passed the Arizona Senate, it was waiting to go to the House. Arizona Governor Cartel Katie Hobbs, her butt was in Oman. What was the governor of Arizona doing in Oman? Anybody?
Weapon sales.
I wish it was as small as weapon sales. I wish it was. She was signing a defense treaty committing the Arizona National Guard to Oman's defense. Hold on. What doesn't work there? What can't the governor do?
She doesn't have the power to sign treaties.
She doesn't have the power to sign treaties. So they called it an arrangement. So now the Arizona National Guard is committed to the common defense of Oman. The Sultan of Oman has more right to the use of the Arizona National Guard than we as Americans do on our southern border to stop fentanyl or whatever their talking words are today. It's disgusting and it has to stop. But we are winning. I want you guys to know this. We are winning. Woo! We're not alone in this fight. We had some good advocates from the Republican Liberty Caucus, which is what I like to call the libertarians in disguise, working within the Republican Party. They took over the committee process and got Defend the Guard put on the statewide primary ballot this March. So the state of Texas got to vote on Defend the Guard, and it passed with 83% support. It outperformed Donald Trump on the Texas primary ballot. We beat him by like 80,000 votes. In 2023, the Libertarian Party National Committee formally adopted Defend the Guard Act as part of its platform. And this is by a country mile the most successful legislative movement that the LP has had in a while. I am proud to have you guys endorsing this as a part of your national platform. Your support has made Defend the Guard the most important non-interventionist legislative movement in the 21st century. And that credit belongs to some very hardworking, groundworking soldiers within the Mises Caucus who have provided us with volunteers who've done phone banking, door knocking. They've testified on behalf of the bill. They organize, they recruit. And they've proven that confrontational politics is effective when it's applied properly. And when enough concentrated resources and a little bit of laser focus, we can defeat the war party. But there's still so much more to do. I'm gonna listen. This is gonna be a little bit of tough love right here, and then I'm gonna wrap up. When the Libertarian Party loses, it's not because the system is rigged. It's simply because libertarians don't care enough to act. Act. The hardest step in any mission is the first step. Most people in politics can't do this. That's it. That first step builds synergy and movement, energy, confidence, motivation. Most libertarians, and these are my people, we would rather talk about liberty than fight for it. Right? The ones in this room, I think, are the exception. Right? You're here because you are engaged. How many of those 50 fair signups? Is that the number? 50 from the last fair? How many are here from that group? If you were signed up for the fair, 1, 2, okay. It's not bad. That's not bad. 2 out of 50. This country is not going to get fixed with more podcasts or retweets or social media posts or likes or comments, all of which are important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're wrong. It's going to get fixed when a determined group of patriots decide to step up and get off the sidelines and take serious action in the political sphere. Bring Our Troops Home has demonstrated more than any other organization that we have both the principles and the tactics to achieve victory. Particularly, victory on the Libertarians' most important issue in your party, war and peace. Remember what the Libertarian Party was founded on. I'm not suggesting that any of you give up 40 hours a week or hundreds of thousands of dollars. If anybody has $100,000 to give up, no, I'm not turning it down. All I need is the bare minimum effort that demonstrates that you care about what you're talking about. And if you're not willing to do that, why are we even in this room? Is the rules debate and the comedy show last night and the selection of delegates, was it that good that brought you here for 3 or 4 days at a time? I don't know. True effort, though, can be through any monthly financial donation, a few hours a month, volunteering for a phone banking with Diego, my director of field operations. Who's worked with Diego in here before? Anybody? A couple guys, right? Diego's amazing. He may be the most singularly focused person I've ever met in my life. His tism is just right. We have flipped entire communities with the pressure of about a dozen people making phone calls the week before a committee hearing. We had no support in the committee, 0. And with about a dozen volunteers giving them about 2 hours each the week before, we flipped the entire committee. All they have to do is just follow Diego's training and what he teaches, and we're actually bringing out some better tools because Diego's doing it with no money, no budget. We finally bought him some stuff that he can use. So I'm not here to shame anybody. It's not my gig. But if you're not willing to support the most important anti-war movement in the United States, you probably shouldn't be a libertarian. This state has sired some of the greatest turn-of-the-century anti-war Americans from yesteryear, And here's where a little bit of guilt comes from. I don't want them looking down from whatever place they're at in the universe and being ashamed of my performance. Right? I hope that hurt a little bit. But if you are willing and ready to enlist the movement, my team is ready to do the work. We are the only national organization whose primary focus is pass and defend the guard. If you give us the time and the effort, the resources, we'll do all the heavy lifting. And just to give you an idea of how lean and efficient we are, with just $20 from every person in this room, we could fund efforts in more than a dozen states. Because we don't take salaries, we don't spend money on advertising. Everything you see is paid for out of private, t-shirts, buttons, everything. It's all important stuff, but none of it really is as important as the effort. Victory is possible, peace is within our grasp. All I need from libertarians is to reach out and grab a hold of the rope, because I'm gonna pull you along. And the more people that are hanging on, the stronger I get. We want you in the movement. We want someone to step up and help pull that rope. But until you're ready to do that, I'll pull you along. I'll bring you. Please, at some point today, go to www.defendtheguard.us and click on Minnesota. Click on your state. Our bill sponsor is there, and then a couple people that have sponsored it but done nothing. You'll see their pictures there. But that's not what's important. What's important is if you go there, there's a petition that you can sign. Put your name on it, because when time comes, I print out every single petition, and I deliver them to the legislature. So when they get 1,000 petitions from people in their district, they know, oh my God, this is a real thing, right? You have to give them the language that they understand. And what do politicians understand? What languages? There's two of them.
Money and votes.
Power.
What was that?
Money and power.
Money and power,
Money and votes.
pain and pleasure.
Right.
And I am not in the business of giving pleasure to any politician. We deliver one thing, pain. So go there, sign that petition, and in fact, if you want to, you can do it on your phone right after our next speaker is done speaking. Because you're not going to do it while she's speaking, that would be rude. So together, the Libertarian Party and Bring Our Troops Home can defeat the war party and restore a sound U.S. foreign policy that no longer has the capability to use a strike-first replacement of diplomacy. Join me. Join the United States Senate candidate from the North Star State, Rebecca Whiting.
Woo!
Join TJ Hawthorne. Join the veterans who are carrying the torch for liberty, who are fighting for you here in your own state. They're your neighbors right now. And together we can defend the guard and we can restrain the U.S. foreign war policy. Thank you.
Woo!